served with divorce papers on the sacred day of Thanksgiving, and humiliated as a burden of a wife for the sake of a home-wrecking mistress. Arya, along with her little daughter, could only cry in absolute surrender. But hold your breath. The exact seconds when she reveals her true identity as the grand matriarch of a retail behemoth, subsequently stripping her husband of every single asset until he begs by the side of a toxic sewer, is the most satisfying execution of karma this year. For those who have subscribed, may your fortunes flow smoothly. Amen. This is her story. My name is Arya Davenport. I am 32 years old, and I am the sole owner and majority shareholder of Davenport Holdings, a corporate behemoth that dominates retail chains, modern supercenters, and the most elite commercial real estate across New York City and its surrounding metropolitan areas. However, if you asked the people around me, they only knew me as a frumpy woman in faded, oversized sweatpants who always smelled like minced garlic and kitchen spices. A completely ordinary stay-at-home mom whose only job was to keep her head down and serve her husband. I intentionally forged this golden cage myself. It was a perfect, meticulous disguise designed to see who genuinely loved me and who was merely a cold-blooded parasite feeding off my life. My husband, Blake Preston, was the sickening epitome of the middle-class illusion of perfection. He held the position of operations manager at one of my subsidiary companies. It was a position he believed, with every fiber of his being, he had earned purely through his own genius and hard work. In reality, I was the one who secretly ordered the board of directors to hand him that chair, just so his fragile male ego would remain intact. In my eyes right now, Blake was no longer the knight in shining armor I had married. He was nothing more than the worst investment portfolio I had ever built, a toxic asset that continuously eroded the balance sheet of my life without yielding a single cent in dividends. Then there was Eleanor Preston, my mother-in-law. To the outside world, she was a devout, church-going woman whose speech was always wrapped in scripture, a grand dame of the country club charity luncheons who loved to flaunt her wealth. But behind the closed doors of this house, she was a blood-sucking loan shark masquerading as a parent. She constantly glorified her son at her elite Bible study groups while implicitly destroying my reputation. She felt entitled to every single coin her son produced and continuously demanded my total submission because I was deemed to be merely leeching off Blake's sweat. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her country club fees, her coveted designer bags, and even her luxury European vacations flowed purely out of the drawer of my office desk. Lately, there was another foul stench disrupting the equilibrium of my household's ledger. It wasn't just the smell of cheap, vanilla-scented perfume clinging to Blake's collar every time he came home late. It was the anomaly in his bank statements. There was a persistent leakage of funds flowing smoothly into an account under the name Vanessa. Of course, I had known everything since the very first month. I am the ultimate executor who monitors every single cent of my money's movement. I was simply waiting for the most theatrical, precise moment to detonate this bomb right in their faces. And that moment arrived on what was supposed to be the most family-oriented day of the year. This morning was Thanksgiving. The rich aroma of roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and savory stuffing hung heavy in the living room of our home, a luxurious estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, which legally stood on land owned by my private corporation. Even though I had a fake deed drafted under Blake's name just to lull him to sleep in his wet dreams of power, I had just finished dressing Nora in a beautiful white lace dress. My little girl, who was only 5 years old, we sat on the velvet sofa, waiting for Blake to return from his morning charity run to begin the tradition of the Thanksgiving toast. Eleanor was already sitting haughtily in the accent chair, wearing a sparkling cashmere sweater bought using my company's dividend payout from last month. The front door opened slowly. But Blake did not come home alone. He stepped inside with his jaw raised in sheer arrogance, wearing his expensive, tailored Italian coat. Trailing right behind him was a young woman in a flashy red cocktail dress that was far too tight and inappropriate for a holiday morning. Vanessa. Her face was plastered in thick, tacky makeup, and clutched in her arms was a chubby, soundly sleeping baby boy. The living room fell dead silent. The air felt frozen, as if the thermostat had been dropped to absolute zero. Nora hugged my leg tightly, hiding her terrified face. Eleanor gasped. But strangely, her eyes did not project the fury of a mother-in-law witnessing infidelity. Instead, they gleamed with a ravenous greed upon seeing the baby boy. "Blake, what is the meaning of this?" I asked, intentionally letting my voice tremble violently. I began to play my role as the oppressed, victimized wife. Manufactured tears rapidly pooled in the corners of my eyes, ready to fall. Blake stood in the center of the room like a tyrannical king who had just conquered a new territory. "Sit down, Arya. Don't make a cheap scene on Thanksgiving," he hissed with a cold, slicing tone. He pulled Vanessa closer by her waist, parading her in front of me like a championship trophy. "This is Vanessa. And this child. This is my flesh and blood, the true heir to my bloodline. Something you could never give me because you are only capable of birthing a useless girl." Those words rolled off his tongue without an ounce of burden, sharp and venomous. He brutally insulted his own flesh and blood, just for the sake of an outdated, pathetic, patriarchal validation. I sobbed uncontrollably, letting the tears stream down my cheeks. "How could you, Blake? On Thanksgiving, after all my years of devotion, serving you and your mother?" "I am your lawful wife," I screamed, throwing myself onto the cold marble floor, desperately clinging to Blake's knees. Nora began to wail loudly. Seeing me treated so despicably, Blake swatted my hands away with a look of pure disgust, as if I were an infectious disease. "What devotion? You are nothing but a burden of a housewife whose only skill is draining my paycheck. Look at yourself, Arya. You're a mess. You can't even compare to Vanessa. She is a woman of class. She knows how to take care of her body, take care of her husband, and birth a male heir who will one day inherit all my wealth." Vanessa smirked with immense satisfaction, looking me up and down, as if I were a piece of historical trash that needed to be disposed of immediately. "I'm so sorry, Arya, but Blake needs a partner who is on his level. Besides, this golden baby boy needs a proper environment. Not a house run by a woman in faded sweatpants like you," she sneered with a mock-innocent tone that was deeply nauseating. Eleanor, instead of defending her daughter-in-law who was weeping on the floor, rose from her chair with wildly glittering eyes. She approached the baby and stroked his cheek with trembling hands. "My grandson. Oh Lord, finally, my prayers have been answered. Blake, I finally have a male heir to carry on our grand legacy," she exclaimed hysterically, completely ignoring her terrified, crying granddaughter in my arms. "Starting today," Blake's voice echoed, heavy and full of arrogance. "I want you out of my life, Arya. I am filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. We're done. You can stay here temporarily until you find some cheap motel to crash in. But remember this very clearly. This house, the cars, and all the savings are purely mine. You are not entitled to a single red cent." He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a few crisp $100 bills, and threw them directly at my face. The money fluttered and scattered across the expensive rug. "That's charity to feed you and your daughter today. Don't ever say I am a cruel husband." Blake turned around haughtily, wrapped his arm around Vanessa's waist, and took his mother's hand. "Come on, Mom. Let's leave this parasite behind." Vanessa has prepared a special holiday feast at our new home, a $5 million mansion in Greenwich, that I just bought in cash to celebrate the birth of my son. The three of them marched out without so much as a backward glance. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut with a deafening thud, leaving me and my daughter in a suddenly quiet living room, flanked by the smell of roast turkey and the lingering residue of their humiliation. Nora's crying pierced the silence. I immediately scooped her small body into my arms, kissed the top of her head, and patted her back with soft, soothing strokes. "Shh. It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy is right here. There is nothing worth crying over from a stupid man who is entirely financially illiterate," I whispered softly. Just as the roar of Blake's sports car, a Porsche whose exorbitant lease was fully paid by my company's cash flow, faded away at the end of the exclusive cul-de-sac. My theatrical performance was over. My crying ceased instantly, as if someone had just flipped a kill switch. The tears on my cheeks dried incredibly fast. My shoulders, which had been shaking with fake grief, now straightened with the old aristocratic aura I had kept hidden for so long. I rose from the floor, elegantly brushed the dust off my knees, and stared at the $100 bills scattered on the rug with a smile that was freezing cold. You have just signed your own financial death warrant, Blake. I led Nora to her room, turned on the television to her favorite cartoons, and made sure the toddler was calmly playing. After that, I walked with a steady, commanding stride toward my private home office, brilliantly concealed behind a mini library bookshelf on the second floor. The room was soundproof, lined with solid steel, and contained military-grade encrypted data servers. I sat in my genuine leather swivel chair, booting up 3 ultra-wide monitors in front of me. The screens blinked to life, displaying the massive financial dashboard of Davenport Holdings, real-time stock movements, and the exact details of Blake's bank accounts down to the final decimal point. Of course, he could brag about that $5 million mansion. That house was indeed purchased using a corporate director loan facility, a facility I exclusively and secretly granted him through the right hand of my board of directors. But Blake, who was profoundly stupid and too lazy to read, never scrutinized the contracts. He didn't know that hidden in the final pages of the dozens of thick documents he signed was an absolute veto clause granting me the power to forcefully seize the asset back at any given moment if proven there was a moral defect or financial manipulation. And bringing a mistress to kick his lawful wife out of the primary residence on Thanksgiving Day was the ultimate, pristine definition of a disgusting moral defect. I picked up my specially encrypted phone and dialed my most ruthless, trusted corporate attorney, Harvey Sterling. The call was answered on the second ring, a dedication I always appreciated, even on a national holiday. Happy Thanksgiving, Miss Davenport. Is there a problem I can solve for you on this holiday? Greeted the deep, professional voice on the other end. Happy Thanksgiving, Harvey. I apologize for interrupting your holiday, I said calmly. My voice no longer carried a single drop of weeping sorrow. It was purely calculated steel. Prepare our entire legal team. Starting tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m., I want you to freeze all bank accounts under the name Blake Preston. Conduct a comprehensive forensic audit down to the absolute roots of every cash flow in the operations division where that parasite works. I took a sip of the black, sugarless coffee left on my desk. It tasted incredibly bitter, yet it spread across my tongue with the sensation of absolute satisfaction. One more instruction, Harvey. Prepare a civil lawsuit draft for corporate embezzlement amounting to millions of dollars, and activate the unilateral cancellation clause to revoke his usage rights over the Greenwich Mansion and the Porsche he recently financed under our subsidiary's name. Make sure that by the day after tomorrow, that arrogant man, his gold-digging mother, and his cheap homewrecker are entirely stripped bare, possessing nothing but the clothes clinging to their filthy bodies. Understood, Miss Davenport. Your orders will be executed with high precision. Shall we immediately process the data blockade into the federal banking system to place him on the check systems and SEC blacklist? I smirked slightly. The fangs of the predator had finally peeked out. My eyes stared sharply at the wealth graph on my monitor that kept ticking upward, perfectly contrasting the fate of Blake, which was about to nosedive straight into the bottom of financial hell without any breaks. Absolutely. Make sure he cannot buy so much as a piece of candy or bottled water on credit in this country. Let them feast and laugh today, Harvey, because starting tomorrow, I will ensure those 3 traitors are starving and begging in a dilapidated shack on the outskirts of the city. Click. I cut the connection without any further pleasantries. My charade as the naive, weak wife was officially closed. The real game had just begun, and the queen had moved her piece across the chessboard to mercilessly sweep away the pawns. 5 minutes ago, before those traitors truly disappeared from my sight in the living room, Eleanor had taken the time to deliver her final mental blow. The scene was still playing clearly in my head, permanently recorded as the primary fuel to annihilate them. At that moment, I was still kneeling on the marble floor, playing the role of the wretched wife hugging her own knees. Eleanor, wrapped in her expensive cashmere, stopped at the doorway. She turned to me with an unimaginably cruel, condescending glare. Her lips curled into a victorious smile. "Listen closely, Arya," Eleanor hissed, her voice slicing through the holiday air that was supposed to be full of gratitude. "I never liked you from the start. You have no class. You're just a woman in oversized sweatpants who got lucky my successful son married you. Now that you've failed to give me a grandson, don't ever dream you can demand a cut of his wealth. You are just a freeloader. From this second on, you are a nobody. Go back to being a beggar, because your place is exactly beneath the soles of my shoes." She practically spat on the remnants of my dignity right in front of that cheap mistress, who chuckled cynically while rocking her baby boy. A flawless insult, an absolute justification that freed me from whatever lingering remnants of human mercy I had left. Now, from behind the 4K resolution monitors in my secret office, I watched the continuation of this tragic comedy. Through the outdoor CCTV cameras installed at every angle of the estate's canopy, I could see with crystal clarity how those three parasites prepared to leave my property. The Thanksgiving morning sun shone brightly, reflecting a blinding glare off the hood of the pearl-white Porsche Cayenne parked haughtily in the front driveway. That $150,000 luxury SUV was a corporate vehicle I exclusively assigned to Blake. Yet, in his shrunken brain, that car was a trophy of his masculinity. Proof that he was a king of the city. On the monitor, Blake was busy loading 4 Rimowa classic aluminum suitcases into the trunk. Those suitcases cost thousands of dollars each, purchased using a corporate credit card whose bills were quietly paid by my finance department without him ever realizing. He moved with thick arrogance. His chest puffed out, and wrapped around his left wrist was a Rolex Daytona that caught the light. I sneered coldly looking at that watch. Blake thought he bought it with his year-end bonus. He didn't know that a manager's bonus at his level wouldn't even cover the second hand of that watch. I subsidized the rest of the cost through an anonymous account to the boutique, just so my husband wouldn't feel inferior when gathering with his business associates. How ironic. The man who had just kicked me out like a mangy dog was literally draped in my money from the top of his head to the tips of his toes. While Blake acted as a bellhop for his own stolen goods, Eleanor stood near the car door posing like a supreme empress. On her right and left arms, she carried 3 Hermes bags, a Birkin Epsom 30, a Kelly Retourne, and a Lindy intentionally turning the logos outward. The total value of the bags in her hands was well over $100,000. Her eyes radiated an endless greed. She felt as though she was walking away with the grand treasure of her victory, banishing the parasitic daughter-in-law from her kingdom. However, the laws of economics and corporate law that I authored did not operate in ways she could comprehend. They thought they had won their freedom and fortune. In reality, they were merely moving my assets from one coordinate to another for a very brief, temporary period. My focus shifted to the second monitor, zooming straight in on Vanessa's face. The cheap homewrecker stood by the hood of the car, ignoring her baby who was starting to fuss in the stroller. Instead, she was busy tilting her head, finding the best lighting angle for a selfie. Her fingers nimbly typed on her smartphone screen. I didn't need to hack her phone to know exactly what she was doing. She was definitely uploading that photo to Instagram, tagging the location in this elite neighborhood, and adding a caption about her new life with her successful hubby and beloved baby boy. Vanessa was utterly convinced that the new $5 million mansion waiting for her was her future palace, a place where she would reap abundant capital gains. She imagined living as a socialite, hosting garden parties, and laughing at me, whom she considered historical garbage in Blake's life. She was too stupid to understand that the luxury mansion was tied to a Davenport Holdings corporate loan facility. The legal documents contained a morality clause specifically engineered by my lawyers. The moment this infidelity and divorce threat were logged into legal records, that house would immediately enter a disputed status. There would be no palace for the mistress. There was only a concrete trap ready to cage her. I leaned back in my comfortable leather chair, slowly sipping my black coffee. It was soothing to watch just how blind they were to reality. Blake truly thought of himself as an untouchable executive. He didn't realize that within the hierarchy of the retail empire he worshipped, he was merely a low-level pawn. He was a toxic asset that had ruined my mental stability for years. And now, it was time for me to execute a massive write-off. On the screen, the trunk of the Porsche Cayenne finally closed. Blake opened the door for Vanessa and Eleanor with a sickeningly gentlemanly flair, then slid into the driver's seat. The turn signal blinked, and the luxury car glided out of the giant iron gates of my home, leaving a thin trail of dust on the smooth asphalt. Go ahead, my foolish king. Enjoy the fresh air of your freedom for the next few hours, I whispered to the monitor that now only displayed an empty street. My voice echoed in the soundproof office, cold and merciless like the angel of death. My hands danced across the mechanical keyboard, unlocking access to the company's primary banking system. With a few precise clicks, I terminated the secret subsidy pipelines that had been propping up Blake's lifestyle. I severed access to his secondary credit cards. Starting tonight, the autopay systems for his old luxury apartment, premium insurance, and his country club golf memberships would blink with the status declined. I stared at my investment portfolio graph continuing to glow bright green. Tonight, I would sleep soundly in my own home, holding my daughter who was the true heir to this empire. Meanwhile, tomorrow morning, when dawn broke and the Federal Reserve Network came online, the asset liquidation process would swallow them alive. The civil lawsuit drafted by Harvey Sterling would hit them like a hurricane without warning. Blake would be fired, all his assets seized, and his name plastered clearly on the SEC and banking blacklists as a high-level corporate embezzler. Not a single bank would lend him money, not even to buy a pack of gum or a bottle of water on credit in this country. Their victory today was the most expensive optical illusion ever created. I would make sure, before the month ended, the very hands that insulted me and flaunted their luxury would be digging through garbage cans. Those who were used to the scent of European perfumes would soon become intimately acquainted with the stench of the sewer. I am the ultimate executor, and I will ensure those parasites turn into morally bankrupt vagrants rotting in a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of the tri-state area, weeping for the day they dared to awaken the sleeping dragon hiding beneath these faded sweatpants. Night finally crawled down, blanketing New York, slowly swallowing the remnants of the noise from the most nauseating Thanksgiving in my life's history. In this quiet, calming, pastel-themed bedroom, I sat silently on the edge of the bed, gently stroking Nora's hair as she finally fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from crying all day. The toddler's breathing grew steady, peaceful, completely unaware that earlier this morning, her biological father had just discarded her like broken scrap metal just for a baby boy from another woman's womb. I stared at my daughter's innocent face with eyes that no longer projected the sorrow of an abused mother, but rather the impenetrable glint of a steel shield. Nora was not a useless girl as hissed by that moronic man in the living room today. Flowing through my daughter's veins was the pure blood of the sole heir to the Davenport Holdings throne. As for the baby boy worshipped by Blake and Eleanor this morning, that child was just an unfortunate pawn born from the womb of a cheap mistress. A genetic anomaly who would ultimately only inherit debt, disgrace, and absolute poverty from his biological father. I rose from Nora's bed, walking slowly but with absolute certainty toward my massive bathroom lined with Italian Carrara marble. Standing in front of the giant mirror that reflected the dim lighting, I looked straight into my own eyes. The woman in faded sweatpants who had spent the entire day acting as an obedient wife and a daughter-in-law willing to be trampled on slowly peeled the cheap cotton fabric from her body. The sweats dropped to the floor, taking with them the illusion of weakness I had meticulously maintained for 7 years. I stepped under the stream of hot water, letting every drop wash away the lingering smells of Thanksgiving, turkey, stuffing, and most importantly, washing away the filthy residue of the parasitic family's insults. Blake and his mother always assumed and bragged that I was the one leeching off their generosity. They used me as a living punching bag to inflate their tiny egos in front of their country club friends. Truly an exhausting psychological charade. But tonight, The curtain on that cheap comedy was officially drawn shut. After slipping into an elegant, pitch-black silk robe, I walked toward my private library on the second floor. This was a restricted area for anyone in the house, including Blake, under the pretext that I always needed absolute silence to read thick novels. In reality, behind the massive oak bookcase holding classic encyclopedias lay the main control room of my empire. I pressed a perfectly camouflaged wooden panel, scanning my fingerprint and retina on a hidden biometric scanner that immediately glowed green. The solid steel door, 4 inches thick, slid open without the slightest hiss. I stepped into my office, which was kept at a very cold temperature and was entirely soundproof. Embedded permanently in the corner of the room was a class. 1 military-certified fireproof steel vault. I spun the highly complex mechanical combination dial, punched in a digital code, and inserted dual physical keys. Click. The massive vault door swung open heavily, exhaling dry air that had been preserving documents worth billions of dollars inside. Within the belly of that vault lay the neatly organized foundation of my husband's destruction. I pulled out a thick leather folder containing hundreds of pages of ownership deeds and legal contracts. The classic European-style mansion we currently lived in. The original deed clearly stated it belonged to Davenport Real Estate, LLC, not Blake Preston. That man had only ever signed a use agreement riddled with deadly trap clauses. The same went for the pearl-white sports car he drove earlier with such extreme arrogance. That car was a perk that could be revoked at any time without written warning. I began sorting the documents on the desk, assembling the lethal ammunition to hand over to Harvey Sterling tomorrow morning. Blake thought he was a business king standing at the peak of financial glory, imagining piles of capital gains from every illusory asset he claimed as his own. He never knew that in my financial ledger, he was nothing more than a toxic asset that had long been waiting for the right moment to be written off the face of the earth. My hands now shifted to a stack of internal financial reports I had been personally monitoring for the last 6 months. Herein lay the genius of absolute stupidity. Blake, with his limited authority as operations manager, had recklessly diverted $8 million in corporate funds through dozens of shell vendors. That dirty money was what he used to buy the luxury mansion and finance Vanessa's hedonistic lifestyle. He thought he was so smart, exploiting bureaucratic loopholes, never realizing that the Tier 3 security system I engineered intentionally let those transactions slip through slowly, just to build an irrefutable criminal case. Come tomorrow at dawn, my independent auditors would descend to execute a merciless, non-stop forensic audit. Every single dollar he stole would be flayed open, converted into a civil lawsuit draft that would wrap around his neck until he choked to death on lifelong debt. I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair, opened my laptop, and accessed the primary banking system of Davenport Holdings. I used my absolute veto right as the controlling shareholder to authorize an emergency freeze. I flagged Blake's payroll account, blocked his corporate credit cards, and paralyzed all secondary bank accounts affiliated with his name. I terminated the autopay features that routinely and automatically paid Vanessa's VIP health insurance premiums and the installments for Eleanor's diamond jewelry. When the Federal Reserve opened its digital gates tomorrow, Blake Preston's name would be forcefully hurled into the check systems and banking blacklist, let alone financing a new luxury home. He would be flat-out rejected by every financial institution in the country just for trying to open a basic checking account. He would become an anomaly, a walking corpse in the financial world. I stared at my empire's portfolio graph continuing to flash green on the monitor. There is no room for mercy or emotion in business, and this marriage, in the end, proved to be the worst business transaction I had ever engaged in. I am not just a weak, hurt wife. I am the executor who will collect the debt of betrayal with compounded interest. Those 3 parasites had crossed my line of tolerance. Eleanor, spitting on my dignity in front of a homewrecker. Vanessa, degrading my daughter's status. And Blake, believing he could just throw me away on a holiday. They would all soon learn that my manufactured financial gravity was infinitely crueler than hell. The asset liquidation process would swallow their lives without leaving a single second to spare. The $5 million dollar mansion they bragged about today would be tightly sealed by security tomorrow. They would be violently thrown out onto the streets, downgraded to the status of homeless vagrants within a span of fewer than 48 hours. I had secretly bought a dilapidated trailer in the most run-down Rust Belt trailer park on the edge of the tri-state area. It sat right next to a toxic drainage canal that reeked with the overwhelming stench of sewage. That is where I would forcefully drag the three of them. I would make sure that arrogant man realized he was nothing more than worthless historical garbage in my empire. The tears of my fake persona had dried without a trace. And now, all that remained was the mathematical calculation of how to torture and crush them as coldly and for as long as possible. Tonight, Arya, the weak wife, was dead, and the grand matriarch of Davenport Holdings had fully risen to demand her revenge. The Friday morning after Thanksgiving is usually spent hitting the Black Friday sales or simply warming up leftover turkey in the kitchen. But for me, this morning was a symphony of vengeance that had to be played with the perfect precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The sun had just peeked over the eastern horizon. Its rays pierced the bulletproof glass of my office, illuminating the 6 massive monitors that had been relentlessly vomiting Davenport Holdings cash flow data since last night. I had changed out of my nightgown into a bespoke charcoal gray haute couture blazer. There was no longer any trace of the weak woman in faded sweats who had knelt weeping on the marble floor yesterday. Today, I was the angel of death dressed in designer clothing. At exactly 8 a.m., the secure communication channel on my desk blinked red. Harvey Sterling, my corporate attorney and trusted legal architect, was standing by on the other end. He never took a day off if the matriarch called. "Good morning, Miss Davenport." The legal team and internal auditors have been on full standby since dawn. "We are just waiting for your green light to initiate the comprehensive forensic audit on the operations division headed by Blake Preston," Harvey reported. His voice heavy, sharp, and entirely devoid of hesitation. "Execute it, Harvey," I ordered coldly. My eyes never left the red graphs marking the fund leakages on my screen. Peel back every single fictitious transaction he created. I want to see in granular detail how that parasite transferred my company's blood into that cheap homewrecker's bank account. Within minutes, my monitors displayed a data visualization that was both nauseating and immensely satisfying. Blake, with the trademark arrogance of a mediocre man drunk on power, had used highly amateurish manipulation methods. He forged dozens of retail procurement invoices to funnel $8 million into a shell corporation. From there, the money flowed as smoothly as river water into Vanessa's personal accounts and Eleanor's gold-backed savings. They thought they were smart. They thought I was just a stupid woman leeching off them, entirely financially illiterate. In reality, the Tier 3 security system I built intentionally allowed those transactions to happen, permanently logging every byte of data as undeniable criminal evidence. Blake had dug his own grave with his own hands. I merely lent him the shovel. "Miss Davenport, we've found recurring monthly transfer receipts paying for Vanessa's previous luxury penthouse, as well as the all-cash purchase of the $5 million Greenwich mansion using corporate funds," Harvey's voice sounded again. "And the most ridiculous part, the Porsche Cayenne is registered under the subsidiary, yet he uses it as a personal asset." I laughed softly, a dry laugh that didn't reach my eyes. "That is the difference between a true entrepreneur and a parasite in a tie, Harvey. He mistook corporate director loans for personal property. Use my veto right immediately. Revoke the power of attorney over the house and the car. Change their ownership status to assets under dispute. I do not want them to enjoy a single night's sleep in a house bought from robbing me. Executing immediately, ma'am." "The internal security team is ready to carry out the asset eviction whenever you give the word," he replied swiftly. "Not right now." I cut in quickly. "Let them feel like they've won today. Let the mistress feel like the grand lady of the manor and flaunt her illusory capital gains on social media. Those who fly the highest will experience the most devastating pain when they crash into the asphalt." I stared at the Davenport Holdings portfolio graph continuing to glow green before shifting my gaze to the banking terminal screen. It was time to sever their oxygen line. With supreme authorization, I froze Blake's payroll account. Then, I canceled all corporate credit cards and joint accounts that had been the lifeblood of their hedonistic lifestyle. The auto-pay features that routinely paid Vanessa's premium insurance, Eleanor's elite skincare treatments, and Blake's golf club memberships now blinked with a terminated status. Blake would not be able to withdraw a single cent from an ATM. His credit cards would be humiliatingly declined at every register. Even to buy diapers for that baby boy he worshipped, he would have to scrape coins from the bottom of his pockets. And for the final blow, I ensured Blake Preston's name was directly submitted to the federal banking blacklist. Harvey, ensure the notification letter to the SEC and the banking blacklist is sent. I want his financial status to be equivalent to a corpse. No one is allowed to extend him credit, no matter how small. It's already queued in the federal banking system, ma'am. Effective as of today. Additionally, the civil lawsuit draft for high-level corporate embezzlement is printed. We are demanding $15 million in restitution, covering the stolen funds, interest, and both material and immaterial damages. $15 million. That number would become the iron chain, wrapped around Blake's neck for the rest of his life. The man who yesterday discarded me and my daughter like historical trash on a family holiday was now officially a toxic asset I had liquidated from my life. He was no longer my husband. He was just a corporate fugitive waiting for execution. Perfect, I hissed, sipping the black coffee that now tasted as sweet as the honey of victory. And what about the replacement property I requested? A dilapidated trailer in a toxic Rust Belt trailer park has been purchased in full under Blake Preston's name. Ma'am, the area is highly congested, sanitation is terrible, and the stench of the chemical runoff and sewage is extremely pungent. As per your instructions, that will be his registered legal address for court summons and debt collection. I nodded in satisfaction. A final dumping ground incredibly fitting for humans with rotten hearts. Blake, Eleanor, and Vanessa would never suspect that their tickets to a living hell had already been printed. The asset liquidation process would soon swallow them alive, transforming them from fake socialites into humiliated vagrants. On my far-right monitor, I opened Vanessa's social media profile via an anonymous account. Just as my wild predictions suggested, the woman was live streaming. She was showing off the marble pillars of her new mansion, posing in a silk nightgown bought with money stolen from my company. Look at my new house, followers. My hubby is just amazing. He always spoils me. She cooed playfully at the camera. Meanwhile, Eleanor strolled through the background wearing thick gold jewelry, flashing the most arrogant smile I had ever seen. My laughter erupted, bouncing off the walls of my cold office. Truly a highly entertaining clown show. They were dancing in full victory right on top of the glowing embers I had set for them. I shut my laptop with a firm click. All preparations were complete. The leash had been tied tightly around Blake's neck. Tomorrow, I would yank that leash with all my might, choking off his financial oxygen and his illusions of power until he ran completely out of breath. I am the ultimate executor, and I will welcome the return of that fraudulent operations manager with a red carpet leading straight to his total annihilation. The weekend following Thanksgiving is usually colored with the lingering euphoria of holiday shopping and leftovers. But on the screen of the iPad Pro lying on my solid mahogany desk, all that was presented was a tragic comedy painted in sheer greed. I sat with my legs crossed, sipping warm chamomile tea, letting my eyes dance across the screen, displaying the Instagram Live from Vanessa's public account. The cheap homewrecker appeared completely intoxicated by her illusion of power. She was walking down the Carrara marble hallway of the Greenwich Mansion, a majestic home bought purely with the blood money of my company. On the screen, Vanessa wore a designer silk loungewear set, cradling her baby boy in one arm, while her other hand busily held her phone to show off every corner of the room. She pointed the camera at a massive bohemian crystal chandelier in the living room, then twirled playfully in a sickeningly cutesy manner. Thousands of her followers, mostly gossip-hungry women and admirers of a fake lifestyle, flooded the comments section with empty praise and a shower of heart emojis. I know, right, babes? My hubby works times hard. Vanessa babbled to the camera in an exaggerated, melodic tone. That's why he deserves a wife who takes care of herself and gives him an heir to his throne. Not like that woman from his past who only wore faded sweats and smelled like onions. That woman was just freeloading off Blake the whole time anyway. Thank God Blake finally woke up and chose me to be the lady of this castle. I smiled a crooked smile, a smirk as cold as ice that didn't reach my eyes. Vanessa's words flowed like an out-of-tune melody from a broken music box. She proudly declared her victory, completely unaware that she was broadcasting additional evidence that I would use to crush her in court. She showed off the garage housing the pearl-white Porsche Cayenne, calling it the ultimate symbol of absolute success, and babbled foolishly about how this luxury property would generate millions in capital gains over the next few years. Poor, brainless girl. She didn't know the fundamental difference between an investment asset and a toxic REIT. That house, that sports car, even the expensive silk gown clinging to her back, all of it was tightly bound to a corporate contract that I had unilaterally revoked last night, using my absolute veto power. Instead of reaping multiplied profits, Vanessa was actually documenting and flaunting evidence of corporate embezzlement. I swiped the screen of my iPad with an elegant motion, switching to a highly encrypted instant messaging app. A 2-minute video had just arrived from Aunt Maya, one of my loyal business associates who had intentionally infiltrated a post-Thanksgiving country club charity luncheon, the very place where Eleanor was putting on her main performance today. I pressed play, and the arrogant face of my former mother-in-law instantly filled half the screen. Eleanor sat cross-legged in the center chair like a reigning queen, surrounded by dozens of other high society wives. Perched on her lap was the Hermes Birkin Epsom 30 she had walked out of my house with yesterday morning. Her neck and wrists were laden with blinding diamond and gold jewelry. Her mouth was busy chewing an expensive macaron from a silver tray, but that didn't stop her in the slightest from spewing venom from her tongue. "Oh, Aria? I threw that ungrateful woman out of our lives." Eleanor laughed loudly, her voice shrill and piercing to anyone listening. My son Blake finally realized that woman was just a parasite endlessly draining his wealth. For years she couldn't give me a grandson. All she did was sit at home, embarrassing our grand family standards. Now Blake has a new wife with so much more class, and of course, a very handsome grandson. My son's wealth has finally fallen into the hands that truly deserve it. My hands slowly clenched into fists on the mahogany desk. Not out of blind, explosive anger, but because the urge to witness the destruction of that old woman was overwhelmingly strong. Eleanor, a true parasite who had secretly sucked the blood of my empire for 7 years, dared to call times a parasite. She defined me as historical trash thrown into the dumpster while puffing out her chest, draped in gold and diamonds paid in full by my own sweat. I leaned back casually, imagining just how epic and beautiful the scenery would be when that pile of fake gold was forcibly stripped from her aging body. The old woman currently laughing uproariously had no idea her fate had been sealed shut. In less than 48 hours, she would be thrown out of her illusory castle. She would transform into a solitary, homeless vagrant, forced to drag her frail old bones to a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of the city. A place where her luxury perfumes would be forever replaced by the stench of sewage evaporating from the toxic black canal right outside her front door. My attention returned to the 6 massive monitors in front of me. Automated reports from the banking system began cascading into the main dashboard like a hail of bullets. Red notifications blinked aggressively. An auto-pay transaction attempt for Vanessa's platinum credit card, which she had apparently just used to try and buy a branded bag from an online boutique 5 minutes ago, had just been flatly rejected by the system. With bold text, "Account frozen." Blake definitely hadn't realized the disaster yet. The Federal Reserve was closed for the holiday weekend, and formal notifications of frozen accounts are usually delayed until the first business day. But inside the federal banking database, his name was already eternally carved into the check system's blacklist. Meanwhile, on the left monitor, Harvey Sterling and the internal audit team were working in silence, compiling the forensic audit results at a terrifying speed I had never seen before. Every fake transfer, every fictitious invoice ever signed by Blake's dirty hands was now neatly organized into a lethal legal indictment. The $15 million civil lawsuit draft was printed perfectly, lying on my desk waiting for the red stamp of the executor. My company's portfolio graph continued to show a highly positive upward trend, starkly contrasting the financial lifeblood of my husband, which was already on its deathbed. I picked up my primary smartphone and drafted a formal invitation email adorned with the luxurious letterhead of the Davenport Holdings Board of Directors. An exclusive invitation sent directly to Blake Preston's personal email address. The message was highly formal, specifically engineered to bait his towering ego. Asterisk. Dear Mr. Blake Preston. Asterisk. Asterisk. You are exclusively invited to attend the Board of Directors meeting on Monday at 9 a.m. EST in the Executive Boardroom, 40th floor. Your attendance is highly crucial regarding this quarter's performance evaluation and a potential top-level leadership restructuring. Asterisk. Blake, being the narcissist hungry for status that he was, would instantly interpret this email as an invitation for a promotion to ascend to the Board of Directors. He would show up in his sharpest, most expensive suit, wearing the Rolex I bought him, and stride in with his chest puffed out in pride. He would think he had finally conquered the peak of the corporate world with his own two hands. In reality, the 40th floor executive boardroom he dreamed of would become his execution gallows. That is where I would drop my mask right in front of him. At that round table, the asset liquidation process would be hammered down with full force right into his arrogant face. I pressed send, ensuring the lethal, barbed hook was swallowed deeply by my prey without him even realizing it. Asterisk. Have fun with the rest of your holiday weekend, you traitors. Asterisk. I whispered to the freezing empty room, picturing their pale faces when the slap of reality hit hard. Asterisk. Because starting Monday morning, I will make sure you beg for a swift financial death. Asterisk. The notification on my bottom right screen blinked bright green, breaking the silence of my secret office on Sunday night. The indicator signaled that a high-priority email had just been opened from an IP address located in the elite Greenwich estate. The barbed bait I threw had officially been swallowed whole. I twirled a Mont Blanc pen between my fingers, envisioning with absolute precision the look on Blake's face as he read that board meeting invitation. The man with an ego as high as the sky but a brain as shallow as a puddle was surely jumping for joy, feeling that the peak of the corporate world was finally bowing at his feet. In his stolen castle tonight, Blake was surely bragging in front of Vanessa and Eleanor. That cheap mistress was probably showering him with adoring kisses, feeling that her decision to steal another woman's husband was the most brilliant investment of her life. While Eleanor, the prestige-obsessed old woman, was definitely drafting a new narrative to brag about to her country club group tomorrow regarding how incredible her son was. They were celebrating the mirage of capital gains from a directorial position that would never exist. A feast of fools before the gallows were officially unveiled. Earlier this afternoon, Harvey Sterling gave me a brief, highly amusing report. When Blake tried to take his new family out for a lavish dinner at a 5-star Manhattan restaurant to celebrate this promotion, his corporate credit card was declined. The POS machine spat out a declined receipt. Naturally, arrogant Blake surely screamed at the restaurant manager, blaming a banking system error due to the long holiday weekend. He was too blind to realize that the failure of that auto-pay system was his very first death knell. He didn't know that in the central database, his name was permanently etched into the federal blacklist. Monday morning finally arrived, bringing with it a cool breeze that blew through the vents of my luxury Manhattan penthouse. Today, I no longer needed my disguise. The faded, oversized sweatpants that always made me look like a pathetic freeloading woman had been burned to ashes in the fireplace last night. In its place, I wore a bespoke women's suit from a Milan designer in a sharp navy blue, paired with a white silk blouse and red-bottomed Christian Louboutin stiletto heels. My hair, which I usually tied up carelessly, was now styled into a sleek, flawless modern chignon. There was no more Aria, the weak wife. Standing in front of this giant mirror was the grand matriarch of Davenport, the sole executor of a massive retail empire. My journey to Davenport Tower in the financial district was escorted by 2 black SUVs filled with my internal security team. The moment my heels stepped onto the pitch-black marble of the main lobby, The entire staff, from receptionist to the building manager, bowed respectfully at a 90-degree angle. They were the people who knew my true identity, the loyal soldiers who kept the Queen's secret safe from the gaze of the parasite who had been sleeping in my bed. The VIP gold glass elevator shot upwards, taking me to the 40th floor. The highest executive floor, accessible only with a special biometric pass. The air in the executive boardroom was extremely cold, conditioned specifically to maintain sanity when discussing billions of dollars in corporate funds. A giant round table made of solid mahogany stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by jet-black leather chairs. I took my position in the main chair, the chair bearing the golden eagle crest, facing directly toward the double entry doors. On the table right in front of me, the instruments of mass destruction I had prepared were neatly arranged. A thick red folder containing the forensic audit results from the independent team, detailing every single dollar embezzled by Blake. Next to it lay a blue folder containing the $15 million civil lawsuit that had been filed at the federal courthouse this morning. And at the far corner lay a rusty brass key, the access to the dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of the city. I had used my absolute veto last night to finalize the initial stages of asset liquidation. I was cleansing my company's portfolio of a highly destructive toxic asset. Through the tablet screen on my desk, I connected to the building's CCTV system. The time read 8:45 a.m. On the screen, I watched Blake Preston stride into the main lobby of Davenport Tower. The man was wearing a light gray suit that looked far too flashy, paired with a silk red tie that accentuated his cheap ambition. His face was beaming with arrogance. His chin was held high, challenging the lobby ceiling. He greeted the receptionist with a condescending smile, the classic style of a big boss who thinks he owns everything. The receptionist, following my strict instructions, returned a very polite, fake smile and directed him straight to the special elevator without asking for ID. Blake assumed that special treatment was a form of respect for his new director position. He didn't realize he was being systematically herded like a fat sheep walking happily into a slaughterhouse. He was a parasite puffing out his chest, thinking the host tree he had been leeching off was about to crown him king. Inside the rapidly ascending elevator, Blake could be seen adjusting his collar and combing his hair with his fingers. His lips mumbled something, perhaps a victory speech or the fantastic salary negotiation he planned to pitch to the board. It was incredibly pathetic to witness the delusion level of a man who was moments away from becoming homeless. He was completely unprepared for the reality that his career, his dignity, and his life would be terminated on this floor. The digital numbers above the double doors of the boardroom changed to 40. A soft chime broke the silence of the executive floor. Through the hallway camera, I watched Blake step out of the elevator with wide strides saturated in absolute arrogance. He walked down the thick, carpeted corridor, unaware that these were his final steps as a free man. Once the doors of this room closed behind him, his status would instantly change to historical garbage, a financial fugitive who only deserved to breathe the stench of a sewer. I leaned my back against the main chair, elegantly crossing my legs and folding my hands on top of the mahogany desk. My eyes stared straight, like the blade of a sword, toward the brass door handle that slowly began to turn downward. Asterisk. Welcome to the lion's den, my stupid husband. Asterisk. I whispered as cold as ice. The door handle was pressed down completely. The perfectly lubricated steel hinges opened without a sound, inviting the traitor into his slaughterhouse. The solid mahogany double doors, 10 feet high, swung wide open, swallowing the figure of Blake Preston into the belly of the 40th floor executive boardroom. The man walked in with a perfectly polished, wide smile, thinking he was walking into a glorious future. But his wide, arrogant strides abruptly halted, freezing on top of the thick Turkish carpet. His eyes, which had been sparkling with anticipation, now narrowed, staring in disbelief at the single human being sitting with supreme elegance in the CEO's chair of honor at the end of the giant round table. I stared at him without blinking, letting the suffocating silence conquer the room. The bespoke navy blue suit I wore radiated an undeniable aura of power, providing a stark contrast to his last memory of me. In his shrunken head, I was just a woman in faded sweatpants who used to cry while chopping onions in the kitchen. a weak figure constantly accused of freeloading off his monthly salary. Arya, what are you doing here? Blake's voice shattered the silence. His tone trembled between anger and total confusion. His eyes swept the empty room, then returned to glare at me with condescension. You followed me all the way to my office? My God, you really have no shame. Are you here to beg me to take you back? Get out of here before I call security. This is an executive boardroom, not a place for historical trash like you. I didn't answer. I merely steepled my fingers on the desk, my lips curved into a smile that was freezing cold. My hand moved slowly, pressing a single button on the touchscreen control panel on my desk. Instantly, the massive projector screen behind me lit up brightly, displaying the majestic logo of Davenport Holdings sitting directly alongside my name in oppressive capital letters. Asterisk, asterisk. Arya Davenport. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Asterisk, asterisk. Blake's eyes widened massively. His eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets as he read the text. His jaw dropped open. He shook his head slowly, refusing to digest the reality that was currently crushing his logic. Sit down, operations manager, I commanded. My voice echoed in the soundproof room like a judge's gavel slamming down. Or should I say, asterisk former times operations manager, T. This is impossible. You're just a housewife. This has to be a system error. You hacked this projector, Blake babbled, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. His delusion was still trying to fight the naked facts. Your biggest mistake, Blake, was mistaking my kindness for stupidity, I said coldly, standing up and leaning both hands on the mahogany desk. I built Davenport Holdings from the ground up. Every brick in this building, every shelf in the supermarket you work at, and every dollar bill you bragged about in front of that cheap homewrecker, all of it belongs to me. You are not a director waiting for a promotion. You are just a parasite I spoon-fed with a title so your fragile male ego wouldn't shatter. I picked up the thick red folder from the desk and threw it with precision. The folder slid rapidly across the smooth surface of the table, stopping exactly in front of Blake. The documents inside spilled out. Please read the first page. That is the result of the forensic audit from an independent team that has been working non-stop since you dropped your divorce threat on Thanksgiving, I said, locking onto his gaze, which was now filled with pure terror. You embezzled $8 million of my company's funds through fictitious vendor invoices. You used that stolen money to finance your parasitic mother's lifestyle and to bribe your mistress with the illusory capital gain of a $5 million mansion. Blake's face turned as pale as the white printer paper in his hands. He tried to read the rows of numbers and transfer receipts clearly displayed before him. His hands shook so violently the paper rustled. Arya, I can explain this. I only borrowed it for an investment. We can talk about this as husband and wife. Blake began to beg. His voice now sounded pathetic. His arrogance had evaporated without a trace. We are not husband and wife, I cut in, sharp as a razor. As of this second, your status at this company is officially terminated with extreme prejudice, and using my absolute veto right as the majority shareholder, I have executed a forced asset liquidation process. I threw the blue folder containing the second legal document. It was the civil lawsuit. I am demanding $15 million in restitution for the theft, manipulation, and both material and immaterial damages you inflicted upon my company's portfolio. You will pay it back down to the final decimal. Blake took a step back. His breathing became rapid, like a cornered animal. You're insane! Where am I supposed to get $15 million? Do you want to kill me? That house, that car, they are all in my name, he screamed hysterically, still trying to cling to the remnants of his illusion. You really are financially illiterate, I sneered, walking slowly around the table to approach him. The deed to the house and the title to that sports car are under Davenport Real Estate LLC. You only ever signed a usage agreement that I can revoke at any time. My security team is already in Greenwich as we speak. Your mother and your mistress are being dragged out without being allowed to take a single one of their luxury items. And, oh, before I forget, I leaned forward, staring directly into Blake's eyes, which were now filled with absolute despair. I already turned off the auto-pay for all your insurance. I froze every bank account in your name. As of this morning, your name has been officially uploaded into the check systems and federal banking blacklist. You will not be able to borrow a single cent in this country. You are no longer human in the eyes of the banking law. You are just a toxic asset. No! You can't do this to me! Blake roared. His face flushed bright red. He tried to lunge at me with what little strength he had left, but before he could take 2 steps, the double doors behind him burst open. 4 massive men from my internal security team neutralized him in seconds, slamming him violently onto the carpeted floor. I looked down at him, incredibly cold, fully embodying the role of the executor. I reached into my suit pocket, pulled out a rusty brass key, and dropped it right in front of Blake's face as he was pressed hard against the floor. The sound of the metal hitting the floor sounded like a death knell. That is the key to your final property. A dilapidated trailer in a toxic park on the edge of the city that I intentionally bought fully in your name as a legal address for court collections. There, you and your greedy family can enjoy the fresh air mixed with the stench of sewage every single day. I stated without an ounce of pity. You walked into this boardroom as King Blake. Now, walk out of my building as a humiliated vagrant. Blake thrashed, crying loudly and screaming curses as his body was forcefully dragged out of the executive boardroom by the security guards. The mahogany doors shut tightly again, swallowing his roars until they could no longer be heard. I walked back to my main chair, adjusted the collar of my silk blouse, and took a deep breath. The air in this room felt exceptionally clean and refreshing. The malignant tumor that had been nesting in my life had been successfully diagnosed, surgically removed, and permanently thrown into the trash. The first execution at the round table was complete, and now I just had to enjoy the symphony of their destruction on the streets. The 40th floor executive boardroom returned to silence after Blake's desperate howls were swallowed by the thick mahogany doors and the elevator taking him down to his ruin. I pressed a button on the intercom on my desk, instructing the cleaning staff to immediately spray disinfectant on the carpet area where my ex-husband had just been pinned down. The air in my empire could not be contaminated by the lingering breath of a loser who would soon officially become the resident of a rusty trailer. My focus now shifted entirely to the high-resolution tablet screen in my hand. The screen displayed a live feed from the body camera worn by the head of my internal security team, who was currently standing by in front of the massive iron gates of the luxury estate in Greenwich. Over there, inside the $5 million stolen castle, the 2 parasites who had been sucking my blood were enjoying the final remnants of their luxurious lifespan. Through the hacked access of the house's CCTV, I could see with crystal clarity the sickening scene in the family living room. Vanessa, the cheap homewrecker, was sitting casually on the white Chesterfield leather sofa. She wore sheer designer silk loungewear, busy painting her nails with blood-red polish. Meanwhile, her baby boy slept in a stroller worth thousands of dollars. Across from her, Eleanor was busy stroking the surface of her stolen Hermes Birkin bag. Her eyes sparkled with greed. They laughed crisply, probably discussing how pathetic my fate was, the woman in faded sweats they thought was crying over her destiny because she was a freeloader discarded on a holiday. They were dancing on top of a financial time bomb whose countdown had just hit 0. Harvey, I greeted through the direct earpiece connection to my lawyer, who was standing outside the gates with 10 heavily built men in all black tactical suits. Execute now. Show them no mercy. This is a high-priority asset liquidation process. Empty that house of its toxic assets in less than 15 minutes. Executing, ma'am. Harvey's heavy voice replied, simultaneous with the loud screech of the iron gates being forced open by the security team. Through the screen, I watched scene after scene unfold like a cinematic masterpiece themed around vengeance. The main doors of the luxury mansion were breached with military precision. Eleanor screamed hysterically, dropping her porcelain teacup until it shattered into pieces on the Persian rug. Vanessa leaped off the sofa, her makeup-plastered face instantly turned pale white upon seeing the swarm of men in black, rapidly securing every corner of the room. "Who are you? How dare you enter my son's house? This is a robbery! I'm calling the police! Eleanor shrieked, her voice high and piercing, her finger, laden with gold rings, pointed wildly at Harvey Sterling. Harvey stepped forward with the calm demeanor of a professional executioner. He opened a black leather folder and pulled out an official document, legalized by the federal court. Good morning, Mrs. Preston. I am Harvey Sterling, official legal counsel for Davenport Real Estate, LLC, he stated with a flat, cold tone. Based on the veto right of the majority shareholder and a seizure warrant from the federal court today, this property is officially being vacated. Mr. Blake Preston has been proven to have committed large-scale corporate embezzlement and is currently facing a $15 million civil lawsuit. Liar! You must be Aria's lackey! That poor woman, right? Blake is a successful director. This house is his. He bought it in cash with his own money, Vanessa yelled, trying to mask her terror with a highly fragile fake arrogance. She grabbed her phone, intending to dial 911, but was swiftly stopped by one of the security officers. Aria Davenport is the founder and CEO of Davenport Holdings. Every asset, you are so proud of this house, the Porsche Cayenne in the garage, even the silk gown you are currently wearing was purchased using stolen funds from my client's corporation. Harvey shot back mercilessly. His words shattered their delusions to pieces. Blake Preston was terminated with extreme prejudice this morning. All his accounts have undergone a comprehensive forensic audit. His funds are frozen, and his name is on the federal blacklist. You must vacate these premises immediately. A moment of silence swept through the living room for a few seconds. Their shallow brains were apparently working overtime to digest the fact that the obedient woman they had constantly degraded was the absolute ruler of this theatrical stage. Reality finally hit them like a sledgehammer. No, it's impossible. My jewelry. These bags belong to me. Eleanor screamed in panic. Her greedy instincts took over. She lunged forward, trying to hug the 3 Hermes bags and the jewelry box resting on the glass table. But the strong hands of the security officers secured the items first. All luxury goods inside this house are the result of fictitious fund flows and are included in our legal seizure portfolio. You are not permitted to take a single cent out of this property, except for the clothes currently clinging to your bodies, Harvey stated firmly, cutting off the old woman's last shred of hope. Let go of that bag! That is the result of my hard work as the lady of the house, Eleanor roared, tears of panic beginning to ruin the makeup on her aging face. She tried to scratch the security officers, but her efforts were utterly useless. Her frail body was easily restrained and pushed back. On the other side, Vanessa tried to sprint toward the master bedroom, intending to save the collection of jewelry and luxury watches Blake had promised her as the capital gains of their affair. But 2 security officers immediately blocked the marble staircase. You're crazy! I have a baby! You can't just throw us out onto the street! Vanessa cried hysterically. Her fake tears no longer worked. The cheap homewrecker finally realized she wasn't dealing with a crybaby wife, but rather a corporate monster completely lacking the empathy vein. You may take your baby, miss, but leave the stroller. Its cost was paid via the company's operational auto-pay system, Harvey instructed with machine-like precision. I laughed softly from behind my tablet screen. Truly a highly melodic orchestra of weeping. The very people who strutted arrogantly out of my house yesterday with expensive suitcases, bragging of their false wealth, now had to be dragged out stripped bare of all assets. Take them outside. Lock the gates, I commanded through the earpiece, leaving absolutely no room for mercy. The subsequent scene was a visual masterpiece of my revenge. Eleanor was forcefully dragged, thrashing and screaming curses that no longer held any power. She was thrown out of the main doors, landing hard on the scorching hot asphalt of the front driveway. Vanessa followed right behind her, carrying her baby boy while sobbing uncontrollably. Without any extra makeup, without expensive bags, without proper heels, the security team herded them out of the towering iron gates. Residents of the elite neighborhood who happened to be driving by began to slow their vehicles, watching the humiliating spectacle of 2 fake socialites being evicted like feral animals. There was no more illusion of luxury or Blake's protection. The body camera displayed Eleanor's face, covered in dust and smeared makeup, staring blankly at the gates that had just been heavily padlocked from the inside. She no longer had jewelry all over her body. She no longer had any pride to flaunt. She and the young parasite next to her had officially become homeless vagrants under the brutally scorching New York sun. "Deliver my final message to them, Harvey," I said, leaning back into my chair of grandeur. From the high-resolution screen, I saw Harvey Sterling standing tall behind the iron bars, staring coldly at the two pathetic creatures huddled on the sidewalk. "My client, Miss Aria Davenport, sends her warmest regards." Harvey's voice boomed through the iron gaps. "She reminds you that historical garbage belongs in the dumpster and should be forgotten. Enjoy your new life on the streets alongside the stench of the sewer that will accompany your final breaths of arrogance. As the executor, she guarantees you two will never rise again." I turned off my tablet screen with an elegant snap of my fingers, cutting the live feed with a smile of absolute satisfaction. The golden cage had been successfully reclaimed, emptied of the disgusting germs. Now, I just had to sit cross-legged and wait for those wretched rats to blame and devour each other on the city streets. The afternoon sun was roasting the city asphalt mercilessly, reflecting heat waves that blurred the view outside the 10-foot wrought iron gates. From behind the bulletproof, maximally tinted windows of my Maybach parked statically in the shadow of a large tree at the end of the Greenwich block, I sat with my legs crossed, supervising the street theater I had orchestrated to perfection. The blackout tint shielded me from the outside world, giving me a comfortable, air-conditioned VVIP front-row seat to witness the final act of arrogance from the three parasites who had dared to stain my life. There was no longer a CCTV monitor in a steel-lined office. This time, I wanted to inhale the scent of their despair directly from close range. I am the executor, and watching their financial lifelines go through their death throes on the scorching pavement was an absolute privilege I deserved. A faded, beat-up yellow taxi braked abruptly right in front of the giant iron gates of the $5 million mansion, which was now tightly padlocked with thick chains by my security team. The back door of the taxi opened, vomiting out the figure of Blake Preston, who looked exactly like a walking corpse. His expensive navy suit was a wrinkled mess. His silk red tie hung loose and disorganized, and his face was as pale as cotton. He had just been physically thrown out of Davenport Tower after the slap of the forensic audit, and the $15 million civil lawsuit crushed his ego into humiliating dust. Blake appeared to be arguing fiercely with the taxi driver. His hands trembled as he dug into his pockets. Naturally, his debit cards, credit cards, and e-wallet apps on his phone were completely paralyzed due to the forced termination of the auto-pay systems I executed this morning. He no longer had access to a single drop of corporate funds, and his new status, officially logged into the Federal Check Systems blacklist, made him instantly and absolutely destitute. With a face bearing unimaginable shame, he was forced to hand over his expensive Italian leather dress shoes as collateral to pay the cab fare, leaving him standing in dirty dress socks on the boiling asphalt. The foolish man who, just yesterday morning, still felt like the king of the world now turned weakly, only to be greeted by a sight that instantly shattered the last remnants of his sanity. Sitting on the sidewalk in front of the sealed gates were Eleanor and Vanessa, that were huddled together in the street dust, surrounded by a pile of cheap suitcases secured by the legal team before stripping them of their luxury items. The cheap homewrecker looked incredibly pathetic and drained of her entire aura. Her makeup was melted by a mix of sweat and tears. Meanwhile, her baby boy was crying from thirst because they no longer had access to the imported baby formula that was previously paid for limitlessly by my household staff. Next to her, Eleanor sat with a vacant stare, mourning the loss of the diamond jewelry and Hermes bags that had been forcibly repossessed as part of the legal seizure portfolio. "Blake, my son!" Eleanor shrieked hysterically, struggling to stand up and limping toward him. "What happened? Why did those men in black throw us out? They took everything. My bags, my jewelry, your car, everything was confiscated. Aria, that woman in the faded sweats, she trapped us alive." Blake stared at his mother with hollow eyes radiating pure horror. His shoulders collapsed like a building whose foundation had been blown out. Arya. She owns everything. Mom, he whispered. His voice cracked with absolute despair. She is the CEO of Davenport Holdings. I was fired with extreme prejudice. All our assets were pulled via her veto right because none of it belonged to me. We have nothing left. Mom, I am now being sued for $15 million. Vanessa, who had been busy trying to soothe her crying baby, suddenly froze. Her face hardened. The illusion of capital gains and her status as a high society matriarch evaporated instantly into the hot air, replaced by the incredibly bitter reality that she had just destroyed her own future by trading it for a fictitious rich man. What did you just say? Vanessa's high-pitched scream sliced through the street noise. She approached Blake with eyes burning with hatred. You said you were a massive director. You said this house was entirely yours. You promised to make me the lady of the manor. It turns out you're just a broke parasite who's been freeloading off your lawful wife's sweat this whole time. Shut your mouth, Vanessa, Blake snapped, the veins in his neck bulging. His face turned bright red from a mixture of shame and exploding anger. This is all happening because of you. If you hadn't whined and demanded that $5 million house and that sports car, Arya would never have tracked the corporate funds. You destroyed my career and my life. I destroyed it? You tricked me and seduced me, you broke loser. You are nothing more than a highly disgusting, toxic asset. Vanessa retaliated brutally, spitting right near Blake's feet, her words sliced through the ex-manager's remaining dignity. I refuse to live in poverty with you, drowning in millions of dollars of debt. I am leaving right now. Eleanor, realizing that this mistress was about to flee and leave them behind in their ruined state, lost her temper uncontrollably. She lunged at Vanessa, grabbing the homewrecker's long hair with whatever old strength she had left, fueled by deep-seated vengeance. You filthy tramp! You really are a cursed parasite! Eleanor roared wildly, yanking Vanessa's hair violently, completely ignoring the baby crying even louder on the ground. Because of your seduction, my son lost a filthy rich wife. Because of you, I lost my honor and my wealth. Give me back my family's dignity! Let go of me, you crazy old bat! Vanessa screamed in pain, retaliating by shoving Eleanor's frail body as hard as she could until the old woman fell hard, slamming onto the burning asphalt. Blake could only stand frozen and helpless, covering his face with his hands, unable to break up the incredibly humiliating street brawl. The three traders who, just yesterday morning, were happily allied to discard me like historical trash, were now tearing at each other, cursing each other, and devouring each other like feral dogs fighting over a bone in a dumpster. From inside the cool cabin of the Maybach, I smiled with such satisfaction that my teeth showed. My window rolled down slowly, just about 2 inches, enough to let the sound of their pathetic squabbling enter as the accompanying melody to my most epic victory. The asset liquidation process was complete, both financially and psychologically. There was no more theatrical stage. All that remained was the hell they had built for themselves. I grabbed my primary phone and gave one last instruction to Harvey, who was monitoring from across the street. Harvey, send in that rusted old scrap metal pickup truck we prepared. Tell them that it is the absolute last free transportation my empire will ever provide. In less than 5 minutes, a rusted pickup truck with a dirty, dusty, open bed stopped right near their sidewalk. The driver tossed a dull brown envelope right at Blake's face. Inside was their new legal address and the single key to the only home they possessed, a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of the tri-state area, bordering directly on a toxic waste drainage canal. Get in! Miss Arya requested that I drop you off safely at your new residence, the driver shouted with an obvious mocking tone. Blake, Eleanor, who was still crying in pain, and a disheveled Vanessa stared at the pickup truck with a degradation that words could no longer describe. They had no other choice. Without a single cent to their names, with stomachs growling, and a brand new status as New York City vagrants, they were forced to climb awkwardly into the back of that filthy open truck bed. My window rolled back up tightly, instantly cutting out the street noise. As the old pickup truck drove slowly away, leaving behind the elite neighborhood they would never set foot in again, carrying 3 greedy humans toward their new home, filled with the stinging stench of sewage, I leaned back comfortably in my leather seat. The debt of their oppression had been paid in full with compounded interest. And now, let the universe take over their extended punishment. The heavy rain that had been pouring since the afternoon brought no relief to the toxic, muddy trailer park on the edge of the Black Canal. Rainwater leaked heavily through the cracks in the rotting aluminum roof, creating puddles of thick brown mud on the warped linoleum floor of a claustrophobic 12x 12-foot rusted trailer. The smell of ammonia, mixed with the stench of the overflowing sewer right outside the door, evaporated into the air, choking the lungs inside what felt more like an abandoned cage than a home. Blake Preston sat huddled, hugging his knees, shivering in the cold beneath the dying flicker of a 5-watt bulb. The man who once loved to wear expensive tailored suits was now wearing only a faded, moth-eaten undershirt with a torn collar. His prized navy suit had long been sold to a pawn shop for a mere $50. Just to buy 2 cheap cans of baby formula and a fast food meal they had to split 3 ways. The former operations manager who routinely showed off his fictitious capital gains was now no different from historical trash rotting in the darkest corner of civilization. In the damp corner of the room, Eleanor lay weakly on a moldy, mildew-infested mat. There were no more sequined cashmere sweaters or $1,000,000 Hermes bags on her lap. The old woman who used to worship the social hierarchy and craved respect was now wrapped in a faded, floral house dress given by a neighbor in the slums. A lethally ironic twist of fate. The very faded sweats and house dresses she once insulted when Arya wore them were now her only protection from the bites of swamp mosquitoes. Her body was covered in angry red rashes she scratched until they bled. "It's hot. It itches." "Oh Lord, why did you give me this cursed place?" Eleanor complained hoarsely, her breath gasping to endure the foul stench. "Blake, do something. I cannot live in this garbage dump. Go find a job. Go beg your director friends. Don't just sit there mourning your fate like a loser." Blake turned his head. His eyes were bloodshot and circled by pitch-black bags from immense mental torture. "Find a job where, Mom?" Arya blocked every single path. "My name is marked in red and permanently listed on the Czech Systems and SEC blacklist. Yesterday I applied to be a warehouse clerk, but the moment HR ran my background check, they kicked me out. I'm a corporate fugitive with a criminal record. Even the day labor agencies reject me because I'm considered a high-risk fraud liability." Anger exploded in Blake's chest. But it was the impotent anger of a financially castrated man. 3 weeks had passed since the asset liquidation process executed his life without a trace. He tried to run from reality, but the $15 million civil lawsuit draft always shadowed him like the angel of death. Every time he tried to open a new bank account or use a payday loan app just to stave off daily starvation, the federal banking alerts instantly denied his access. Court summonses regarding the seizure of his remaining personal assets kept arriving via courier to this slum address, reinforcing his status as an economically isolated loser. The containment system operated exactly like the auto-pay features forcefully terminated by the executor on Thanksgiving Day. On the other side of the room, Vanessa sat leaning against the rotting wall. She was nursing her baby with a blank, freezing stare. Her face, which used to be plastered with expensive cosmetics, was now haggard and withered. Her skin was dull, covered in street dust. The cheap homewrecker who once dreamed of becoming a grand lady inheriting a $5 million mansion now surveyed her surroundings with calculative hatred. Her brain was now operating purely on animalistic survival instincts. The baby boy in her arms was not a golden ticket to wealth, but rather an iron anchor dragging her down to the absolute bottom of poverty. Blake was no rich prince. He was just a parasite in a tie who lived comfortably by leeching off his lawful wife's sweat. And now, Blake had proven to be nothing more than a highly nauseating toxic asset. "Stop yelling, Blake!" "The crying of this child alone is enough to make my head explode," Vanessa hissed sharply, her eyes projecting an unconcealed disgust. "If you had half a brain, you wouldn't have let your wife steal everything. You're an idiot. You fell for your own illusions of grandeur. And now you've dragged us all to become vagrants in this filthy sewer. Blake stood up suddenly. The veins in his neck popped wildly. Shut your mouth, Vanessa! If you weren't so greedy, whining and demanding that luxury house and that sports car, Arya would never have noticed and run that damn forensic audit. You are just a loan shark parasite that destroyed my marriage. Your fake vows. You seduced me with your illusion of wealth. You broke trash. I seduced you? Vanessa screamed back, roughly placing her baby down on the wet, moldy mat. The baby wailed uncontrollably, adding to the chaotic noise of that little hell. I am 24 years old. I refuse to rot in this sewer just to take care of your sick old mother and serve a useless man like you. That night, the fracture inside the trailer reached its fatal breaking point. While Blake and his mother fell asleep amidst the biting hunger in their stomachs, Vanessa quietly packed her remaining clothes into a black trash bag. She stared at her baby boy for a moment without a single tear of mercy. That child was just a failed product of her fraudulent investment. With stealthy steps, the woman slipped out of the trailer, pushing through the rainy night, abandoning her common-law husband and her biological child to go find another rich mark to latch onto. Betrayal, in the end, will always birth new betrayal. Far away from the slum's screams of suffering, at the pinnacle of the glass-encased Davenport Tower in the financial district, untouched by the dirty rain, Arya sat with her legs elegantly crossed in her majestic leather CEO chair. She sipped a glass of high-quality, non-alcoholic wine, holding a touchscreen tablet, and read the private investigator's report with eyes as cold as eternal ice. The screen displayed high-resolution, tragic photos. Blake, forced to dig through moldy leftovers in the dumpster behind a fast food joint just to feed his mother. Alongside street CCTV footage capturing the moment Vanessa ran to hail a cab, fleeing with Blake's last remaining coins, and abandoning the trailer in the middle of the night. There was no smile of pity on the grand matriarch's lips as she looked at the screen. There was not a single drop of sympathy for the people who had discarded her on a holy holiday. What flowed through her veins was the absolute satisfaction of an aristocrat who had successfully sterilized her life's portfolio from corporate diseases. Their suffering was her finest masterpiece. This karmic punishment was not universe magic or mere coincidence. It was a masterpiece of financial and legal engineering she had executed using her flawless veto right, systematically and without leaving a single loophole for mercy. Arya placed her tablet on the polished mahogany desk, spinning her chair to face the brightly lit New York City skyline. She enjoyed the rest of the night as the absolute ruler and victor over the suffering of her enemies, who were now crushed without a shred of dignity, crawling in ruin at the very bottom of the food chain. The afternoon sun baked the city asphalt mercilessly, reflecting heat waves that blurred the view outside the 10-foot wrought iron gates. Behind the protection of bulletproof glass and the central air conditioning on the second floor of her primary residence, Arya Davenport stood like a living marble statue. She held an elegant porcelain teacup in her hand, staring down at the sidewalk like a goddess of death, surveying the inhabitants of the hell she had created. Outside the boundary perimeter, two human figures who once claimed to be the king and queen of this house now stood with incredibly pathetic, hunched postures. Blake, Preston, and Eleanor were no different from a pair of vagrants just vomited out of civilization's deepest sewer. Their clothes were filthy, stained with mud, and emitted an overwhelmingly pungent stench of sewage. It was so sharp it triggered the air sensors in the steel-reinforced guard booth of Blake's former security team. The narcissistic man who used to puff his chest out in tens of thousands of dollars suits and flaunt his illusory capital gains to the world was now wearing a faded, torn, button-down shirt. His face was covered in unkempt, patchy facial hair. Meanwhile, his sunken eyes projected the absolute despair of a man who had been financially castrated. Beside him, Eleanor, who once loved to flaunt her diamond and gold jewelry and insult Arya for wearing faded sweatpants, was now wrapped in a dull rag clinging to her frail body. The old woman's wrinkled skin was covered in blistering red rashes, the result of insect bites and toxic water from weeks of isolated living in the dilapidated trailer by the canal. They had walked a long way not to demand justice, because justice had already destroyed them. They came crawling back, begging for leftover air just to breathe. They came crawling back to the gates of the hell they had created for themselves. Miss Davenport. The two targets refused to leave the perimeter of the main gates. Are we authorized to use repressive physical force to clear the area? The baritone voice of the head of security echoed, static but firm, from the wall intercom in her office. Arya placed her porcelain teacup on the mahogany desk with very slow, measured movements. The corners of her lips, painted in dark red lipstick, curled upward, forming a smirk capable of freezing the blood of anyone who saw it. Open the pedestrian gate. Let them in, but only up to the edge of the outer marble steps. Do not let their filth stain the floor of my home. I will come down to see the results of my artwork in person, Arya commanded, her tone as cold as eternal ice, fully embracing her role as the executor devoid of a conscience. Down below, the iron gate slid open, accompanied by heavy, intimidating hydraulic sounds. Blake and Eleanor nearly tripped as they stepped inside hesitantly, heavily escorted on all four sides by massive men in all-black tactical gear. They were forced to halt exactly at the bottom step, physically blocked from stepping onto the gleaming Carrara marble floor. The massive mahogany front doors opened slowly. Arya stepped out with the grace of a true aristocrat. She wore a sharply tailored, dark emerald silk dress, emitting an aura of dominance and absolute power that instantly choked off Blake's airways. There was no longer any trace of the obedient woman who used to chop onions in the kitchen to serve his ego. Standing and looking down at them from the top of the stairs was the lawful owner of the millions of dollars they used to siphon. Seeing Arya's presence, the remaining remnants of Eleanor's mental defenses crumbled to nothing. The prestige-obsessed old woman dropped her frail knees onto the hot asphalt. She crawled forward, ignoring the pain, until her forehead touched the tips of the guards' boots. "Arya, my child, please help me," Eleanor wailed hysterically. Tears washed her face, creating muddy streaks across the thick layer of dust. "I beg for your forgiveness. I am a stupid, blind old woman. Please, drop the civil lawsuit. We have nowhere to live. We are starving every day. That trailer is like a grave. Arya, please give us a little money, just enough to buy a meal today." Arya stared at the old woman groveling beneath her with eyes utterly devoid of human empathy. She looked at Eleanor as if she were looking at a dying pest. "Money?" Arya's voice flowed softly, piercing the hot air, sharp and slicing like a surgical scalpel. "Do you not realize the highly poetic irony here? Mrs. Preston, you used to scream with absolute certainty that I was just a poor woman freeloading off your son's sweat. Now you come crawling, begging the parasite whose dignity you spat on during Thanksgiving." Blake took a limping step forward. His entire body shook violently. He looked up at Arya with bloodshot eyes wet with the tears of defeat. His male ego had long since rotted, destroyed down to the molecular level by the systemic corporate machine his ex-wife had built. "Arya, please help me. I know I'm an idiot. I was conned completely by that cheap homewrecker. Vanessa left us. She ran away, taking all the loose change in my pockets while we slept." Blake's voice cracked. He wailed pathetically like a dog beaten by its master. "Arya, I am begging you with everything I have. Pull my name off the SEC and federal blacklist. I can't even get a job as a warehouse loader because the criminal record from that forensic audit always pops up in their systems. I promise I will be your slave for the rest of my life. I will sleep in your garage as long as you drop that $15 million lawsuit." Arya remained standing tall, arms crossed over her chest, not in the least bit moved by the cheap drama of tears flooding her terrace. Her eyes only projected a highly cruel mathematical calculation. "You apparently still do not understand how the real world works, Blake," Arya stated. Her voice hardened, bouncing coldly off the pillars of the grand mansion. "This poverty choking you is not an accident of fate. The absolute suffering of you two is the greatest masterpiece I have ever consciously created. You are merely a toxic asset that I have permanently exiled from my life's portfolio through a highly precise asset liquidation process." "But we are human, Arya! You can't torture us slowly to death like this!" Blake screamed, the remaining veins in his neck straining in desperation. You are the ones who surrendered your human status the moment you threw away your own flesh and blood and brought that whore into my house to evict me. Arya struck back lethally. Her words pierced Blake's heart without resistance. You are merely historical garbage in my ledger, and garbage has no legal right to demand mercy. Arya used her moral veto right to drop the gavel of justice that could never be taken back. She took one step down the stairs, leaned her body forward, and stared straight through the corneas of Blake's eyes, which were filled with pure terror. I will never, ever drop that debt lawsuit. That document will hunt the both of you down to your graves. The auto-pay system has been permanently settled. Every cent you find on the street, every coin you make from picking through trash will be automatically seized by the banking system. You will starve to death as parasites, exactly in accordance with your true nature from the very beginning. Eleanor let out a long, heart-wrenching shriek, pounding her fists against the asphalt in overflowing despair. Reality finally slammed into the old woman. She realized that the elegant woman standing before her was not a forgiving human being, but the incarnation of divine punishment that could not be bargained with. Arya turned her back with an incredibly graceful, untouchable movement. Throw them back into their natural habitat on the streets. If they dare step their filthy feet within a 100-yard radius of this property line again, break their legs and hand them over to the police on charges of trespassing and security threats. Understood, Miss Davenport. The guards answered. In unison, they instantly grabbed the collar of Blake's shirt and roughly pulled Eleanor's arm, dragging the two helpless bodies across the hot asphalt without an ounce of gentleness. The mahogany doors shut tightly with a loud thud, ending it all. From behind the iron bars that were once again padlocked, Blake and Eleanor were tossed like a pile of scrap metal onto the city sidewalk. They huddled together, weeping over their fate beneath the cruel, scorching sun of New York. Watched by the disgusted, cynical glares of pedestrians passing by, on the second floor, Arya had returned to stand behind her bulletproof glass. She slowly sipped her still warm tea. The view down there was the most perfect painting she had ever collected. The king of illusions and the fake grand dame had officially been ground to dust beneath the soles of her shoes. There was no way out, no forgiveness. This punishment would be eternal. 6 months had passed since the storm of vengeance swept the filth from Arya Davenport's life. At the pinnacle of Davenport Tower, inside the executive office lined with black marble and bulletproof glass, Arya stood with the elegance of an absolute ruler. She wore an ivory-white tailored suit from a renowned Milan boutique, radiating an aristocratic aura that was freezing cold and untouchable. In her arms, Nora, the true heir, slept soundly with steady breathing. The little girl who was once insulted as a useless descendant by her own biological father was now officially the sole beneficial owner of billions of dollars within the massive retail portfolio. Arya looked out at the expanse of the city below her like a deity overseeing the turning of the wheels of fate on the chessboard of life. There were no more traces of fake tears from a wife in faded sweats who had to pretend to be devoted, cooking in the kitchen, and bowing weakly to protect her husband's fragile ego. Arya had completely transformed into the pure, flawless executor. She had used her absolute power to rip those parasites out by their deepest roots. And now, she only had to enjoy the symphony of their destruction from afar. Far beneath the gleaming skyscrapers, a starkly contrasting reality was torturing her traitors without mercy. In a cramped, dark holding cell that reeked of urine, Blake Preston sat huddled in the corner of the freezing concrete floor. There were no more expensive designer wool suits. There was no more Rolex watch gleaming on his wrist. And there was no more European cologne he used to spray to seduce other women. The arrogant former operations manager now only wore a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit. His body was emaciated from malnutrition, and his face was covered in horrific bruises and welts, the result of relentless mental and physical abuse from fellow inmates. Blake had not only lost his physical freedom, but he had been civilly assassinated and terminated. The $15 million civil lawsuit slammed down by Arya without mercy had become a financial death sentence wrapped around his neck. Because he was utterly unable to pay restitution for the findings of the forensic audit, Blake was sentenced to the maximum federal prison term without the slightest chance of parole. His entire financial access remained completely paralyzed. His name was permanently etched in red ink on the federal banking blacklist, ensuring he would never touch the national banking system again, even if some fictitious miracle freed him from those iron bars. In the eyes of the law, society, and the corporate order, Blake was nothing more than a toxic asset that had been successfully and perfectly written off. There was no VIP insurance auto-pay system to cover the medical costs for his injuries. He was left to rot there as a true loser, utterly defeated by his own greed. A fate no less disgusting and nauseating befell Vanessa. The cheap homewrecker had finally surrendered entirely to the instant poverty suffocating her veins. When the illusion of limitless wealth and the dream of capital gains from her $5 million mansion vanished, reclaimed by the lawful owner Vanessa, revealed her incredibly dark true colors. On a dark, stormy night filled with heavy rain, the heartless woman carried her baby boy, the child once glorified as the crown prince and heir to Blake's throne, to a rundown fire station and orphanage on the outskirts of the city. With hands trembling from the cold, she placed the poor baby on the porch without even a proper thick blanket, then walked away without ever looking back. She discarded her own flesh and blood just to search for another rich man whose wealth she could siphon. However, the laws of nature operated with lethal precision. Vanessa's reputation as a parasitic, gold-digging homewrecker had been broadcast widely across the city's elite community thanks to Aria's intelligence network. There was no longer any wealthy, powerful man willing to take in a woman proven only capable of freeloading, extorting, and bringing absolute ruin. Vanessa was now forced to wander the harsh night streets of the city, selling what was left of her dignity for shockingly cheap amounts, permanently transforming into a street-level casualty with zero hope for a future. Meanwhile, in a collapsing trailer on the banks of a toxic black canal, Eleanor was meeting her end in an incredibly slow, silent, and agonizing suffering. The canal continuously emitted a sharp, stinging stench of chemical sewage, poisoning her every breath. The old woman who once worshipped social status, craved respect, loved wearing thick jewelry, and enjoyed degrading her daughter-in-law in public, had officially become a morally bankrupt vagrant, discarded from human civilization. The severely leaking aluminum roof of the trailer allowed dirty, muddy rainwater to drip endlessly right onto her frail body, which now lay on nothing but a moldy, hole-ridden mat. The rare skin disease she had contracted was only getting worse, eating away at her aging flesh from the inside out without a single expensive ointment available for her to buy. She no longer had a high-society charity luncheon stage to flaunt her arrogance. There were no more $1,000,000 Hermes bags to clutch, and no more gold jewelry to blind the eyes of others. Eleanor had metamorphosed into historical garbage, forgotten and cursed by the universe. Every night, amidst the moans of pain and weeping echoing in that slum, she mourned the remnants of her own stupidity. She constantly recalled the horrifying moment when she arrogantly spat on Aria just to defend a parasitic tramp of a woman, the very woman who ultimately threw her alive into this final dumping ground. This absolute poverty and humiliation was the rightful, paid-in-full price for her endless greed. Back at the peak of Davenport Tower, the doors to the matriarch's executive office opened with a very smooth, measured movement. Harvey Sterling, the lead corporate attorney and Aria's trusted right hand, stepped in carefully, carrying a thick document folder made of premium leather. The dignified older man bowed respectfully at a 90-degree angle before placing the folder with supreme precision on the matriarch's massive mahogany desk. The final report of the comprehensive asset liquidation process has been fully executed, Miss Davenport. Harvey reported with a heavy, firm baritone voice filled with absolute respect. All real estate units, luxury vehicle fleets, and liquid funds previously under the manipulative authority of Mr. Blake Preston have been 100% recovered and returned to our company's primary corporate vault. There is not a single legal or bureaucratic loophole left for their side to maneuver an appeal in federal court. Furthermore, the absolute legal inheritance registration under Miss Nora's name was officially validated and legitimized by the Supreme Court this morning. Aria didn't turn around immediately. Her sharp, eagle-like eyes were still staring straight ahead at the city skyline, which was slowly being painted by the reddish-orange hues of the setting sun. She merely gave a small nod of her perfectly styled head, a minimalist gesture that was incredibly elegant and classy. Highly satisfactory work. Harvey, you are dismissed to enjoy your weekend, Arya said briefly. Her voice flowed calmly and coolly, yet it echoed with an absolute power that no one in that room could ever contest. Harvey Sterling bowed respectfully once more, then slowly took a few steps backward before leaving the room. He pulled the double mahogany doors shut without making even the slightest sound. An incredibly luxurious, expensive, and calming silence once again perfectly blanketed the executive office. Arya stroked the top of her still-sleeping daughter's head with genuine, gentle, motherly affection. It provided a remarkably sharp visual contrast to her cold-blooded ruthlessness when skinning and destroying the financial lives of her enemies. She knew perfectly well that she had used her absolute veto right in the corporate world, not just to punish the sinners, but to enact a mass cleansing, sterilizing her empire from the pests that had been eroding her sanity. Now, the balance sheet of her life had returned to a perfect equilibrium. She had forcefully sent those 3 lowly traders on a one-way ticket to the deepest bottom of financial hell, ensuring they would continue to live crawling in the mud, never allowed to see the sunlight of freedom again for the rest of their lives. Arya smiled with satisfaction, letting an aristocratic smile bloom on her lips. It was the pure smile of victory from a brilliant queen who had just won the bloodiest psychological and legal war of the century, without ever needing to dirty her own hands. The exhausting, tragicomedy stage play was now officially closed forever. The queen had reclaimed her golden throne with unshakable stability, and this time, she would make absolutely sure that not a single parasite would ever be allowed to pass through the gates of her palace again. A glorious, limitlessly wealthy future now stretched wide open without obstacles before her, shining incredibly bright, specifically for her and Nora, the true heir and future ruler of the Davenport Holdings empire. This absolute vengeance had been executed with the most flawless, cold, elegant, and merciless precision.
Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated due to restructuring. Sign this by Friday or you get nothing. Brian Kessler slid the severance contract across his mahogany desk like he was dealing cards. I sat there, staring at the document that would end 31 years of my life at Norcross Systems, Inc., 27 days. That was all that stood between me and my full pension, and this 39-year-old CFO knew it. My name is Teresa Langford, and I am 59 years old. For over 3 decades, I have served as Director of Compliance at Norcross Systems, a logistics software company here in Denver, Colorado. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of college when the company had 12 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse. I watched it grow into a 200-person operation with offices across 3 states. I survived 4 mergers, 6 CEOs, and countless rounds of strategic realignments. Through it all, I maintained our regulatory standards, kept us out of legal trouble, and earned the respect of everyone who mattered. Everyone except Brian Kessler. He had been promoted to CFO just 8 months ago, brought in from some consulting firm to optimize operational efficiency. From day one, he made it clear he viewed compliance as a necessary evil rather than a business safeguard. During budget meetings, he would roll his eyes whenever I requested resources for regulatory updates. He questioned every expenditure, every training session, every consultant fee that kept us ahead of industry changes. "This is purely a business decision," Brian continued, adjusting his designer tie. "Nothing personal. The board needs to see immediate cost reductions, and frankly, compliance can be handled by our legal department going forward." I nodded calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I understand." "Good. I appreciate your professionalism about this." He seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting back. "The severance package is quite generous considering the circumstances. 12 weeks of pay plus your accrued vacation time. 12 weeks versus the full pension I had earned through 31 years of dedicated service." The mathematics were insulting, but I kept my expression neutral. Something felt wrong about this timing. Too convenient. Too calculated. In all my years at Norcross, I had never seen anyone terminated this close to pension eligibility. Company policy explicitly protected employees within 30 days of vesting, yet here I sat, with a termination letter dated exactly 27 days before my milestone. "I will review this carefully," I said, placing the contract in my briefcase. "Remember, Friday is the deadline. After that, the offer expires completely." As I walked out of his office, I caught my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. I looked like any other woman approaching retirement. Gray hair, neatly styled, conservative business suit, sensible shoes. What Brian didn't see was the fire burning behind my calm exterior, or the network I had built over 3 decades in this industry. I returned to my office on the 14th floor, the same corner space I had occupied for the past 8 years. The walls were lined with regulatory certificates, industry awards, and photographs spanning my career at Norcross. There was the picture from our first major software deployment in 2003, another from the company's 20th anniversary celebration, and dozens more chronicling the evolution of both the company and my role within it. My assistant, Patricia, knocked softly on the doorframe. "Teresa, I heard rumors. Is everything okay?" "I am clearing out my office," I said simply. "My position has been eliminated." Her face went pale. "But you're so close to retirement. Can they do that?" "Apparently they can." I began removing personal items from my desk drawers, each one a small piece of my professional life. The stress ball from our 2015 audit marathon. The coffee mug Ruth Delgado had given me when she retired 6 months ago. A framed photo of my late husband David, taken during our anniversary trip to Yellowstone. Patricia lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to help. She had worked with me for 4 years and understood better than most how integral I was to Norcross's operations. I handled everything from FDA compliance for our medical logistics clients to transportation regulations for our freight management systems. My departure would leave a massive knowledge gap that couldn't simply be absorbed by the legal department. "Teresa, this doesn't make sense," Patricia whispered. "The Morrison audit is next month. The DOT certification renewal is due in 6 weeks. How can they possibly—" "They will figure it out," I interrupted gently. "They always do." But even as I said it, I knew Patricia was right. Brian Kessler had no idea what my department actually did. He saw compliance as paperwork and bureaucracy, not as the complex web of relationships and expertise that kept Norcross functioning legally across multiple jurisdictions. I had spent years building connections with regulatory agencies, understanding the nuances of ever-changing requirements, and developing internal processes that made compliance seamless for our operational teams. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I had prevented a potential lawsuit that could have cost the company millions when I caught a software glitch that was incorrectly calculating freight classifications. 6 months before that, I had negotiated with state regulators to avoid penalties when our Jacksonville office accidentally processed shipments using outdated hazmat protocols. These weren't just administrative tasks. They were business-critical interventions that protected Norcross's reputation and bottom line. As I packed my final box, I thought about Ruth Delgado's retirement party 6 months ago. She had pulled me aside that evening and said something that seemed casual at the time, but now felt prophetic. "Watch out for the young ones who think experience is expensive rather than valuable." The box containing 31 years of my professional life fit easily in the trunk of my Honda Accord. As I drove through downtown Denver toward my home in Lakewood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening at Norcross. Brian's termination speech had been too polished, too rehearsed. The severance contract had been prepared in advance, with specific clauses that seemed designed to prevent me from seeking legal recourse. I had seen enough corporate maneuvering over the years to recognize a setup when I encountered one. The timing was suspicious. The explanation was weak. And most telling of all, Brian had seemed nervous despite his confident performance. He kept checking his watch and glancing at his computer screen as if he was following a predetermined script. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Patricia's number. "Teresa, I had to call you. After you left, Brian came down to your office with two people I didn't recognize. They spent an hour going through your files and computer. When I asked what they were doing, Brian said they were securing sensitive materials for the transition. Did they take anything? They loaded everything into boxes, all your physical files, your computer, even your desk calendar. And Teresa, there's something else. I overheard Brian on a call afterward. He was talking to someone about Phase 2 and mentioned that the legal department needs to be insulated from liability. What does that mean?" I sat in my car for a moment, processing this information. "Patricia, I need you to be very careful about what you say and do at work. Don't ask questions about my termination, and don't discuss this conversation with anyone. Are you going to fight this? I am going to explore my options." After hanging up, I remained in my driveway for several minutes, staring at my modest 2-bedroom house. David and I had purchased it in 1995, planning to pay it off before retirement. We had succeeded, thanks to careful budgeting and my steady income at Norcross. The pension I was now being denied would have allowed me to maintain my lifestyle, travel, and maybe even spoil the grandchildren I hope to have someday. Instead, I was facing an uncertain financial future with only a minimal severance package to bridge the gap until I could find new employment. At 59, starting over in a new company would be challenging, especially in a field where younger candidates often seemed preferred, despite lacking the depth of experience I possessed. But as I finally got out of the car and walked toward my front door, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about quarterly compliance reports or regulatory deadlines. I wasn't concerned about managing Brian's unrealistic expectations or justifying my department's value to people who fundamentally misunderstood its importance. I was free to focus entirely on one thing, ensuring that Brian Kessler's calculated cruelty would cost him far more than he had ever imagined. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the severance contract spread before me, studying every clause and provision with the same attention to detail I had applied to regulatory documents for 3 decades. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this termination was part of a larger strategy. The contract included unusually restrictive non-disclosure agreements, broad non-compete clauses, and language that would prevent me from discussing my departure with current or former Norcross employees. Most troubling was a section requiring me to acknowledge that my termination was performance-based, rather than part of a reduction in force. This was clearly false. My last performance review had been exemplary, and I had never received any disciplinary actions or warnings about my work quality. The contract was designed to protect Norcross from wrongful termination claims, while painting my departure as justified. I decided to call Ruth Delgado. Ruth had been my mentor and closest friend at Norcross for over 15 years before retiring as HR director 6 months ago. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it would be her. "Teresa, how wonderful to hear from you. How are things at the office?" Ruth's voice was warm and familiar, a comforting reminder of better times at Norcross. "Actually, Ruth, I was terminated today. Brian Kessler eliminated my position, 27 days before my pension vests." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Ruth finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. 27 days? Teresa, that's not a coincidence, that's deliberate. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen this exact scenario before, at my previous company before I joined Norcross. It's called pension dumping. Deliberately terminating employees just before they qualify for full benefits. It saved my old company millions in pension obligations until we took them to court. Ruth's revelation hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying this was planned? I'm saying the timing is too convenient to ignore. Think about it, Teresa. You're one of the most expensive employees on their books in terms of future pension liability. Your 31 years of service translates to a significant monthly payment for the rest of your life. From an actuarial standpoint, Preventing your pension from vesting could save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I felt my anger building as the implications became clear. But surely there are laws against this kind of thing. There are, but they're complex, and companies think they can get away with it if they structure the termination carefully. The fact that they're calling it a departmental consolidation rather than a layoff is part of the strategy. It makes it harder to prove age discrimination or pension manipulation. Ruth, I need to ask you something. Do you still have access to any of your old HR files from Norcross? I shouldn't, but... She paused. When I retired, I kept copies of certain documents for my own protection. Employment contracts, policy changes, executive communications. Things that might be relevant if anyone ever questioned decisions I had made during my tenure. Would any of those documents be relevant to my situation? Possibly. Teresa, why don't you come over tomorrow? We should go through everything together. And I think you should know, I heard rumors before I retired about changes to the pension plan that were being discussed at the executive level. I never got details, but Brian Kessler was heavily involved in those conversations. After hanging up with Ruth, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my back porch, looking out at the mountains in the distance. For 31 years, I had given Norcross Systems my best effort, my loyalty, and a significant portion of my life. I had worked late nights and weekends, missed family gatherings for urgent compliance issues, and consistently put the company's interests ahead of my own convenience. Tomorrow, I would begin to discover just how little that loyalty had meant to them. Ruth lived in a well-maintained ranch house in Westminster, about 20 minutes from my own home. When I arrived the next morning, she greeted me at the door with coffee and a grim expression that told me she had spent the night thinking about my situation. "I've been going through my files," she said, leading me to her home office. "Teresa, what I found is worse than I initially thought." Her desk was covered with manila folders, printouts of emails, and handwritten notes. Ruth had always been meticulous about documentation, a trait that had served her well during her HR career and was about to serve me even better. "This email is from February," she said, handing me a printed message. "It's from Brian Kessler to the executive team, discussing pension liability optimization. Look at this paragraph." I read aloud, "Our analysis indicates that preventing certain high-tenure employees from reaching full vesting could significantly improve our quarterly projections. Legal recommends structuring any necessary workforce adjustments as performance-based terminations or departmental consolidations to minimize exposure." My hands were shaking as I continued reading. The email specifically mentioned identifying employees within 60 days of pension vesting and developing appropriate transition strategies for their positions. While it didn't mention me by name, the timing and criteria made it clear that I had been targeted months ago. "Ruth, this is evidence of conspiracy. How did you get this?" Executive emails were automatically copied to HR for documentation purposes. It was company policy to ensure we had records of all employment-related decisions. When I retired, I kept copies of sensitive communications that might be relevant to future legal issues. I never thought I'd need them this soon. She handed me another document, a spreadsheet showing all Norcross employees within 90 days of pension vesting. My name was highlighted in yellow, along with 3 others: James Morrison from IT, Sandra Williams from Sales, and Robert Chen from Operations. Next to each name were notes about potential restructuring opportunities. "Teresa, you weren't the only target. They're planning to eliminate anyone who's about to become expensive in terms of pension obligations." I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. It was a systematic plan to cheat long-term employees out of their earned benefits. "Have any of the others been terminated yet?" "Not yet, but according to this timeline, James Morrison is scheduled for next month, Sandra Williams in 6 weeks. They're spacing out the terminations to make them look unrelated." Ruth pulled out another folder, this one containing internal memos about the compliance department specifically. "These show that Brian has been building a case against your department for months. He's been documenting every minor expense, questioning every consultant fee, and creating a paper trail to justify eliminating the position. But the department is essential. We prevent legal issues that could cost millions. That's not how Brian sees it. Look at this memo from him to the CEO. She handed me a document titled Operational Efficiency Analysis, Compliance Department. The memo argued that compliance functions could be streamlined by transferring responsibilities to the legal department, resulting in immediate cost savings of over $200,000 annually. What the memo failed to mention was that the legal department had no expertise in regulatory compliance, no relationships with regulatory agencies, and no understanding of the day-to-day operational requirements that kept Norcross in good standing with various government bodies. Ruth, they're going to face massive problems without proper compliance oversight. Probably, but that's not Brian's concern. He's focused on showing quick cost reductions to impress the board. If compliance issues arise later, he'll blame poor documentation or transitional challenges. As I studied the documents spread across Ruth's desk, I realized that my termination was just the beginning of a much larger problem at Norcross. Brian Kessler wasn't just stealing my pension. He was systematically dismantling the institutional knowledge and experience that had made the company successful for over 3 decades. Ruth made fresh coffee while I continued reviewing the documents. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Brian Kessler's strategy, but also revealed something more personal and infuriating. He had been planning my termination since the day he was hired. "Look at this," Ruth said, returning with 2 steaming mugs. She placed another email in front of me, dated from Brian's 2nd week at Norcross. He was asking about pension liabilities before he even learned how our compliance systems worked. The email was addressed to the company's benefits administrator and included detailed questions about pension vesting schedules, early retirement options, and the financial impact of employee separations on the pension fund. He had specifically requested a list of all employees approaching full vesting, their projected pension costs, and any legal precedents for employment changes affecting pension eligibility. "This proves premeditation," I said. "He wasn't eliminating my position because of budget concerns. He was looking for ways to avoid paying my pension from the moment he arrived." "There's more." Ruth opened another folder. "Remember that presentation Brian gave to the board in June about right-sizing operational expenses? I attended that meeting as HR director. Here are my notes." Her handwritten notes were detailed and damning. Brian had presented a 5-year plan that included strategic workforce optimization, targeting employees with the highest benefit costs. He had used charts and graphs to show how eliminating legacy personnel could improve profit margins by up to 12% annually. When board members had raised concerns about losing experienced employees, Brian had dismissed their objections by arguing that institutional knowledge was less valuable than operational agility in a rapidly changing technology sector. He claimed that younger employees with current skills could handle traditional responsibilities more efficiently. The board approved his plan, Ruth said quietly. "I voiced my concerns about age discrimination and the risk of losing critical expertise, but I was overruled. 3 weeks later, they announced my early retirement package. This revelation stunned me. Ruth, are you saying they forced you out too?" "Not exactly forced, but strongly encouraged. They offered me a very generous early retirement package and made it clear that my traditional approach to human resources wasn't aligned with their new vision. I was tired of fighting corporate politics, so I took the deal and left. I realized that Ruth's departure 6 months ago had been part of the same strategy that was now targeting me. By removing the experienced HR director, who might object to questionable employment practices, Brian had cleared the way for implementing his pension dumping scheme without internal resistance. Ruth, we have to stop this. Not just for me, but for James, Sandra, and Robert. And for any other employees who might be targeted in the future. I agree completely. But Teresa, we need to be smart about this. Brian has the legal department on his side, and he's been careful to document everything in ways that protect the company from obvious discrimination claims." She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. We need to build an airtight case that shows pattern and intent. The emails about pension liability optimization are good, but we need more. We need to demonstrate that your termination was pretextual, that the compliance department elimination was manufactured to justify getting rid of you specifically. How do we do that? We need documentation showing that your department was actually successful and necessary, that there were no performance issues with your work, and that the cost savings Brian claims are either exaggerated or will result in much higher costs down the road. I thought about my files and computer that Brian had seized the previous day. They took all my records, performance reviews, cost-benefit analyses, documentation of compliance successes, everything that would prove my value to the company. That might work in our favor, Ruth said with a slight smile. Taking your files could be seen as destroying evidence. And besides, I have copies of your performance reviews in my HR files. You've been rated exemplary for 8 consecutive years. Ruth and I spent the weekend organizing our evidence and developing our strategy. By Sunday evening, we had built a comprehensive case showing that my termination was part of a deliberate scheme to avoid pension obligations through age discrimination. We had Brian's emails about pension liability optimization, the spreadsheet targeting employees near vesting, documentation of the fake justifications for eliminating my department, and my exemplary performance reviews. On Monday morning, I called attorney David Richardson, whom Ruth had worked with during her previous company's pension dumping case. After reviewing our evidence, he agreed to take my case on a contingency basis. This is one of the clearest examples of pension manipulation I've seen, Richardson told us during our Tuesday meeting. The documentation is exceptional, and the pattern of targeting employees near vesting is obvious. We're going to file a formal complaint with the Department of Labor while simultaneously pursuing wrongful termination and age discrimination claims. That afternoon, Richardson filed our complaint, and by Wednesday morning, local news station Channel 7 was running a story titled, "Denver Software Company Accused of Pension Fraud." The reporter had obtained copies of our legal filing and was interviewing employment law experts about the broader implications of pension dumping schemes. By Thursday, the story had been picked up by the Denver Post and several industry publications. Norcross Systems was suddenly facing intense public scrutiny about their employment practices, and potential clients were asking questions about the company's ethical standards. Brian Kessler called me Friday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Teresa, we need to talk. This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Brian. The board wants to resolve this matter quietly. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement." "I'll have my attorney contact you," I said, and hung up. The following Monday brought developments that exceeded even Ruth's optimistic expectations. Richardson called to inform me that the Department of Labor was launching a formal investigation into Norcross Systems' pension practices, and 3 additional employees had contacted his office, claiming they had been terminated under suspicious circumstances. "Teresa, this is becoming a class action case," Richardson explained. "We now have James Morrison, who was terminated last week, exactly 60 days before his pension vested. We have documentation of Sandra Williams being placed on a performance improvement plan despite stellar reviews, clearly setting up her termination. And we have a former IT director who was let go 2 years ago under circumstances that now look highly suspicious." Meanwhile, the media attention was intensifying. Channel 7 had interviewed pension law experts who explained how companies could save millions by systematically eliminating employees just before they qualified for full benefits. The story resonated with viewers because it represented a fundamental betrayal of the social contract between employers and loyal workers. Ruth called me Wednesday with news that made my day. "Teresa, I just heard from Patricia. Brian called an emergency meeting yesterday to announce that the compliance department is being reconstituted immediately. Apparently, 3 clients have raised concerns about regulatory oversight, and the Morrison audit next week has become a crisis because nobody understands your old procedures. Are they offering me my job back? Not yet, but Patricia says Brian looked absolutely miserable during the meeting. The board has apparently been asking very pointed questions about why they eliminated such a critical function right before major compliance deadlines. By Thursday, Richardson received a call from Norcross's legal team requesting a settlement conference. The company was clearly feeling pressure from multiple directions: the federal investigation, negative media coverage, operational problems caused by my absence, and the prospect of additional lawsuits from other terminated employees. The tide was turning, and Brian Kessler was about to learn that stealing someone's pension after 31 years of service carried consequences he had never anticipated. As I looked toward the future, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply ensuring that the truth comes to light, and that my years of careful documentation and professional relationships had given me the tools to fight back when it mattered most. My journey to justice had taught me that loyalty and integrity, while not always immediately rewarded, ultimately provide the strongest foundation for both personal satisfaction and professional vindication.